Welcome to Dylan Experience. I'm Dylan Sessler, your host. Today is episode 20. And I connected with, I think this is going to be a really incredible experience because this is the first time we've talked. We connected through a mutual friend of ours that got us in touch with each other. So this will be fun. My next guest is the author of The 5 L's, a practical guide for helping loved ones heal after trauma. So I'm really excited to talk about that. He is also a veteran of the Army National Guard, just like myself, and he's served 21 years and deployed once to Iraq. He has since worked closely to build the trauma-informed movement across the state of Arizona and now serves as the Assistant Director of Student Success at the Arizona State University Pat Tillman Veteran Center. I'm really excited to talk about that because if you don't know who Pat Tillman is, I'm sure you'll learn soon. But my next guest today is Shawn Banzhaf. Shawn, how are you?
I'm good, Dylan. Man, so glad to take just a few minutes today to talk with you. I just quick shout out to Ashley because she connected us. Yep. We had lunch the other day because she wanted to give me your book. And she and I, we had ridden the ASU shuttle for a couple of years together going to work. And of course, we would talk about different things. And she said, "Hey, can we have lunch together? I want to tell you about a friend I have. His name's Dylan." And then, of course, she gave me your book. And so I haven't got to start reading it yet because that was just 2 days ago. But which is funny how we're here right now. But anyway, our paths are very similar, I think, Dylan. And when she was talking to me about your passion for the same community I have passion for, I knew right away. I mean, we got to meet. And then you say, let's do a podcast. So here we are today. Yeah.
I haven't seen Ashley since my time at Green Bay, and I only spent a year there. So that was back in like 2009. Wow. Obviously she's kept following me, kept watching where I've gone. So it's really, I think it's so cool to kind of have that. Like, social media is such an interesting discussion to have. A lot of people don't like it. Some people do, but I think it's such a powerful tool if used correctly. And obviously we're here only because of social media and literally because, our friend was able to connect us. So yes, thank you so much for that, Ashley, especially if you're going to listen to this.
Yeah. I hope so.
But yeah, Shawn, tell me about your story. Tell me about like what, obviously you have 21 years in the National Guard, but I'm sure there's more than just that. So why have you become such an advocate for, the trauma-informed movement? Tell me about just tell me about your life. Tell me things.
I could tell you some things, Dylan. I'm butting up against 50. So I turned 50 here this next April. So 4 months from 50. So you really start to kind of, when you hit that mid-century mark, look back a little bit, right? Start thinking about what has my life been? And it's a culmination of so many things, doing what I'm doing right now here, working at Arizona State and helping student veterans as they matriculate this higher education space. But, thinking about my life, I had trauma as a kid. So you've probably heard of, early childhood trauma, right? And I had that through a lot of different things and walked through that. I was an achiever. That's my personality. I don't know if you know anything about the Enneagram, but I'm a Enneagram practitioner. So I'm a 3 in my personality, which means I'm the competitive achiever.
Sure.
So, our personalities, our persona is really what we put on to survive through life.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I always wanted to be the best, to do the best. And, wanted to play college football coming out of high school. And worked really hard to do that. But I knew I didn't have a full ride, so I joined the National Guard because they caught me, right. 1-800-GO-GUARD, huh? And, here, pay for your college. So I jumped into that. And it's a legacy for me and my family. I had 2 grandpas that both served at Normandy on D-Day. Had one of them died, I wouldn't exist because neither one of my parents were born at that time. And so when I look back over my time, it was almost like I was supposed to be one day serving my country. So I did that. And, I heard, Dylan, you said you were part of the National Guard.
Yep. I've been in 13, almost 14 years now.
Yeah. So you understand that duplicitous life, right? So
Oh
you're
yeah.
the soldier over here, but then you're the civilian over here. And so what I did is did a little bit of everything, but I kind of chose a career path in law enforcement. I was a
Mhm.
cop for about 10 years, and it worked really pretty well with my military career, kind of the same kind of basic understandings of different things. And but in the midst of all of that, being a cop, being in the military, trauma just kind of follows you, right? So I had my own
Yeah.
childhood trauma, and then I decided I want to be the kind of person who helps other people, a service above myself. I created my whole life around that, and so I carry a lot of other trauma on me that sometimes isn't even my own, and I think we all do that in our own way. And then of course I got deployed to Iraq, and I spent a year over there in 06 to 07. And if you know anything about the history of that war, that's when things were getting pretty nasty.
Yep.
And I think President Bush, he sent over the surge is what they called it, to try to retake some of the places because it was getting nasty. And spent that entire year as convoy security. So my job was hunting for IEDs, and when I found them, is to try to find them before they blew up on me. Right, that
Yep.
was my job. Lots of trauma there. We only lost one soldier. I say only because it's important for what I'm about to say. In combat, out of my whole unit, and since we got home, we've lost four now to suicide, and a couple of them from my own platoon. I was one of the squad leaders there at the time. And I'll tell you what, I had to do something. I got to do something. I became a pastor. I spent 10 years after I got out as a pastor because I was trying to help people heal. And eventually I wound up here. And then I'm working with students who are coming out of Afghanistan, coming out of Iraq, and they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm like, at the time, the military advocate here at the Pat Tillman Veteran Center. How can I help these students? And so the whole thing about the 5 L's, a practical guide for helping loved ones heal after trauma, developed out of how can I help others, how my wife helped me when I came home from war. So
Wow.
that's a nutshell of Shawn Banzhaf. So there you go.
So tell me about it's one thing I want to say is it's remarkable to find someone that also understands that duality of being, being a healer and someone that helps people understand what trauma really means and what these things really mean, and yet also understand what it really means to be a warrior. I think that duality teaches you something that very few people really recognize. And it's a balance. I like to call it a balance that has really, I think, solidified my ability to do what I do.
Mm.
And I'm really interested to talk about that. But I'm curious, what are the 5 L's? Tell me more about that. Like, tell me about this book and tell me what those 5 L's represent to you.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to get spiritual on you, but, for me, it's important. It's a matter of the heart, right?
Yeah.
I was helping a student struggling with PTSD, a Marine who got out, and he's in front of me. And I realized that if, as the military advocate, I can't help him right now, even after I struggled through my own post-traumatic stress, how can I expect anybody else to help him? And so I prayed, and it's odd, but I asked God, give me something to help. And these 5 words came to my head and I wrote them down. And it's love, listen, learn, lesson, LESSEN, and lead. And so I wrote those words down and I just began to think back about my own journey. And I realized that my wife, Jody, she actually did all of these things for me when I came home from war. But something for everybody that's listening, you have to understand, even if someone wasn't shot or someone didn't see a bunch of horrific things, there is definitely a pre-war Shawn and a post-war Shawn. I can never, ever go back to pre-war Shawn. What I've seen and been through, I can't go back to that. And so that's post-traumatic. All right. And the way I handle stress now is completely disordered. The way I used to handle somebody sneaking up behind me is no longer the way I handle it. Right. So that I try to always break that down a little bit. People don't really understand PTSD, and I get that. But so here's what the 5 L's are. And the reason I wrote it as a practical guide for helping loved ones heal after trauma is I'm an Army guy, right? So I use the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. For me, I need that, broke it down Barney style. And here's what any person, you don't have to be a counselor or a therapist, can help other people walk through trauma. First, you have to decide to love them. I always use this. Everybody likes a good statistic, Dylan. There's approximately 330 million people in the United States of America. Approximately 330 million people in America need love. And so if there's one thing I can tell you, if you want to help somebody walk through trauma, you've got to decide to love them. This isn't the kind of love that gets you fired from a job or it gets you in jail. The love I'm talking about is like phileo. It's brotherly love, right? I'm willing to set aside my own things for you. So if you love me, you're going to listen to me. And I talk about it in my book. I call it aerobic listening. It's using your whole body. You've been in combat, Dylan. You understand about like even slowing your breath down, even slowing your heart rate down so that you can concentrate. That's the kind of listening I'm talking about. Not American style listening, which is really listening for the sake of talking, because that's how most of us listen. So if you love me, you listen to me, you're going to learn where my trauma comes from. And once you've learned where my trauma comes from, you can do what you can as somebody who loves me to lessen further trauma. And I always use this example, me and a good friend, we maybe had a hard week at work and we want to go out and tie one on, right? We're both Army buddies, and she and I, we go out, we're getting a little drunk at a Marines bar, and she starts running in her trap about Marines, because that's what Army and Marine people do. Well, she gets her butt whooped and I drag her out. The next time we go out to the bar, as a good friend, I don't take her back to the Marine bar. We go to an Army bar so we can safely make fun of the Marines at a distance. So if you can do that, just lessen further trauma, I think it helps. And then the final thing is just to lead. So here's the thing that I've learned about great leaders. There's all these characteristics about leading that everybody likes to come up with. The CEO is this. But what I found in 21 years in the military and all my life is great leaders bring order to chaos. So if you think back, I'm sure you can think of it, Dylan, those people that have walked into your life when your life is maybe off kilter and they bring order to it, you'll follow those people. Yeah. So that's the thing about PTSD, about trauma. It brings disorder and chaos to a person's life. So you, just by being there as that person to reach down into that dark place, is a leader, and you just didn't realize it in the first place. But that's the 5 L's in its essence.
I love it. I mean, that's so, it meets, I think, all of the needs of people. It's very easy to see why it works, especially obviously I have quite a lot of understanding of trauma. And so what really struck me is the idea of lesson, right? That's not something that I think people really talk about as much as all the other things, right? Like you have to love, right? You have to listen, you have to learn, and you have to lead. But sometimes I think we forget that other people, right, within our space can actually have a very big impact on how we manage the world around us. And I've got some stories about that, right? Like one of the first times I went out in public after my deployment was a really bad choice to go to. I went to a concert on July 3rd, Summerfest, right? And the circumstances of my first deployment it was tough. It was really tough, right? It was the first place I saw, people in a non, together form, right? I saw people that didn't have arms and legs, and I saw things that I'll never forget.
No,
but it just didn't register that going out to a concert on this, on this beautiful July 3rd evening was going to be a problem for me. And I get there and I'm surrounded by hundreds and thousands of people, and I'm hearing things behind me. I'm hearing the concert. Obviously, there's so much going on that I'm already on edge. But then I start hearing fireworks in the background that are, they're miles away, but it doesn't fucking feel like it, right?
No way, man. They're there.
And the only reason I was able to kind of get through that kind of scenario was my best friend immediately recognized it, right? He looked over at me and was just like, hey, like, you're home, right? You're home. Like, it's fireworks. And like, he can say that, but it doesn't feel that way. And that's the difficult thing about trauma, as you know, is like, you can mentally know what the answer is, but the physical response does not recognize it. No. And so, as much as it helps to say like these are fireworks, sometimes it's very helpful to just be in, present with someone that's going through these things. And that idea of lesson is it's really profound to input it into there, because I've heard all of the other ones. Yeah. I've never heard that one kind of placed in context.
It's the one when, if any of our listeners read the book, I tell the story of my first 4th of July coming home. It's so interesting that you bring that to the front, Dylan, because that day, and I won't ruin it but I came out of a porta-john and I must have looked like something, because my wife knew right away. And I will always remember, she said, she excused us from the barbecue. She turned, she got our kids, and she said to me, in these words forever emblazoned, "Let's go home, babe." So just to take me out of this place where I was obviously a mess, back home, after the fireworks had blasted, and just allow me this solace. It was like one of the most powerful things that's ever happened to me. And it was as simple as my wife not making me feel guilty because I got to take the kids away from the fireworks, but she was just there to lessen further trauma from happening. So yeah.
It's the empathy. The empathy is so powerful when it's prescribed as a drug, in a sense, right? Like I see, I work, if you don't know much about my work, I work one-on-one with, I'm a mental health coach. I work one-on-one with people. Trauma doesn't matter. Like, but the majority of the people I work with are, interestingly enough, people that have probably been through therapy and not gotten anything out of it, or have been harmed by therapy.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So I see people that have been traumatized on multiple different levels. Right. And one of the things that is so interesting about our conversations is that they say it's the first time that they have actually ever felt like someone's seeing who they are and understanding who they actually are. And it's remarkable to me, because that's just normal for me to listen and not judge people. Right. And yet it's not normal for them to have that done for them.
Right. Right.
And that's clearly like, that's a societal issue that obviously needs to be addressed.
I've been actually talking about this quite a bit lately, Dylan, about empathy. What I'm seeing is this, and you can tell me what you think and feel about it. But because we are so globally connected, right? We are so connected. I always say that we're like connected, but we're floating alone at sea because we're so hyper connected. Almost alone. So here's the thing about empathy, and I am a full champion of empathy, but because I'm also a highly empathetic person, I've realized what empathy really is weight. So if empathy is to put myself in your shoes, feel what you're feeling, really be there in the moment with you, and you're sharing your trauma with me, Dylan, and I'm taking on that, like I'm buttressing you up so that you're not taking it all on. I'm taking on part of it. but I have my own trauma and my own issues.
Mhm.
So if I take the empathy of your trauma and I stack it on top of my trauma, and then I do that for about 2 or 3 more friends, and you can just, if you saw your life linear, you can start to see this downward trend.
Right.
And then let's add on social media, let's add on big media, and you are empathizing with the entire globe now over famine, destruction, chaos, war. Empathy can be really a heavy weight. And so what I have said is empathy must lead then to the action of compassion. And if you can lead to compassion, it's almost like a rice cooker.
Sure.
You know how a rice cooker actually lets off some steam?
Yep.
Otherwise, it would be an improvised experience.
Right.
So compassion then, leading from empathy into compassion, is as simple as, Dylan, you share your trauma with me. And as you're doing it, you begin to cry. As compassion, I should cry with you, because then it releases those things in my body that need to be released so that I'm healthy as an empathetic person. And so as you're being empathetic, a good self-care thing for you to do is to lead to compassion somehow, whatever that looks like for you individually. But it's usually to mirror the other person's response that they've emoted to their trauma. I think that's compassionate. And think about the times you've cried with people.
Yeah.
You feel closer with them than you've felt with anybody, and they feel closer to you. So I think it's a bonding thing, compassion, if you let it lead from empathy. That's my thought anyway.
What's so interesting about that is that we've gotten to the same thing from different directions. And
Okay.
I love that, because it proves to me that there's 100 ways to solve a problem. And you give someone the tools and the time, and they'll figure it out, and when you start paying attention to how other people's tools work for them, it's really fundamental to start understanding how people work. I love it.
It is.
How I think about that same concept is, it's just empathy for me, but it's empathy applied in a different way, right?
Okay.
Because it's based on how you define your version of empathy, right? Because we can look at the dictionary definition of empathy and more or less gather a good understanding, and we can look at the same, we can do the same thing with compassion, right? But it doesn't really necessarily apply as a value, right? Because if you want to apply a value to yourself, it has to be a rule, and definitions don't work as rules in a way. So how I look at it and how I've defined my own empathy is very simple: listening to understand. It's not taking on anything. It's not like I'm not feeling those emotions to make them a part of me, right? Your trauma is yours. I can't do anything about it. And so I've created a set of values that match what it means to me to understand and apply empathy. I can't do anything for you, right? I can't help you. I can't fix you. I can't solve your problems. It's not my responsibility. I can listen to you though, which means I can learn. And that applies to my other values of learning is one of my other values. Integrity is one of my other values. And then so I have this trinity of empathy requires me to listen because I want to learn. And that's the right thing to do. And so I've created for myself the structure to match what I want. I want to help people, but I'm not taking on their problems and solving everything myself. And that's why effectively I can sit with people for days and weeks and months and do this job, even though it's hard. Like, it's still hard, but at the same time, I'm not taking on these traumas. I'm not taking on these emotions as my own. I'm understanding, because I've created the definition to say, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. And it's created an internal boundary for myself that nobody can cross. Because it's functional for me. And it's really interesting to see that you've created your own kind of linear way of doing that with empathy to compassion. And it's so cool to kind of see how we've both done that separately. We've never met each other, but we've done the same thing functionally. Yes. And that's really cool. I'd love that.
Me too. I think it's great because not everybody's like me and not everybody's like you, right? And
Right.
so I like that there's 100 different ways to solve a problem. Maybe somebody that's listening here is like, Dylan, I always take on the trauma of other people. That's just how I am, right? Well,
Yep.
then they can listen to me. Well, then you need to lead to compassion. But maybe you're this other kind of person like you, Dylan, where they just need to set strong boundaries and strong definitions and structures, because that's important for people. And being of the service, in the whatever service I've been in, you have to take care of yourself as a provider of love, because it's a burden and it's sometimes can get messy, and so you have to really protect yourself so that you can continue to give to your community, whatever that community looks like. So yeah, it's
And
important.
and on that, I'm curious, how do you define love?
Hmm. How do I define love? Well, i think I think for me, love is vulnerability. I think when I think about love, I think about selflessness. Uh, for me, that's what encapsulates my marriage, right? I'm completely vulnerable with my wife. She knows my ins and my outs, right? Almost 30 years we've been married. She knows who Shawn is,
Mhm.
but it's taken time for that vulnerability over the years to be completely uh, espoused. I think vulnerability equals love. I also think selflessness equals love. And so that's how I would define love, really, is that to be vulnerable and to be selfless. Yeah. How
Isn't
about
it,
you?
well, before I answer that, I want to say, isn't it interesting that I don't know how much you've thought about how to define that,
Hmm.
but we use that word so much. And yet when we
Yeah.
think about the definition of it, like, like, where is it? Like that, and
I love cheeseburgers, right?
right. and it's and it comes down to like, this is a question that I really had to attack,
Mm,
back in like 2015, 2016, because I had a suicide attempt back in 2015.
mm,
And really where that came from was uh, my own father's suicide in 1996 when I was 6 years old. And so a lot of my understanding of love was
mm.
really attached to that moment, and how there was abandonment, there was neglect there, and there was a lot of guilt and shame within me. And so I was very much attached to how I saw this man and how I
Yeah.
loved him. Um, and yet there was obviously nothing in return. So I was like struggling with how to define this word, because it was certainly something that caused me issues. And
Yeah.
what I finally came up with is, I define love as action without expectation. And what that really means, what that comes down to, is that it's a one-way road until you allow someone to create the two-way road with you, right? Because if it's the kind of the idea of charity, right? You can give love, right?
Hmm.
And you can receive it as well, but it's not about receiving anything. Like, if you're giving love to receive love, there's power and manipulation being exchanged too,
Right.
and it's a
Right.
transaction, and love isn't a transaction. It's not
No.
conditional, right?
No.
It's unconditional. So it has to be action without expectation
Mm.
to be what I define as love. And so, when I do things for people, the goal isn't to get something in return. It's
Selflessness.
it's selflessness, right? And so you have to then weigh that in a relationship. The relationship is where the expectations need to be,
Mm.
not the love. Like, you can love someone and not be in a
Right.
relationship with them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that's where, I've always had an affinity for definitions, because I think it's how we define the world, how we define our words is really how we define ourselves. It's
I
kind of the
agree.
Sapir-Whorf kind of concept. And I, I
Love's risky business, Dylan. Love is
sure,
risky.
it sure is. And that's where when I really began to define things, it led me to my own wife, and it led me to one, taking responsibility for who I had been, because I was not a kind person, you know, in my younger years.
Yeah.
And I made mistakes. And part of that was, I'm not going to use trauma as an excuse. It was a choice, right? I made choices that were not good and not loving, right? Certainly. And it allowed me to create who I am now, and defining that word really allowed me to take responsibility for who I wanted to be, and understand what was needed to do that.
Yeah. And you've heard the term, I'm sure, post-traumatic growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think you're, just listening to you, that's love is a post-traumatic growth for you, right? From the trauma from your childhood, your own trauma, and out of that, this beautiful thing, your wife, and this love, and this newfound space that you've found yourself. And I think that's pretty beautiful, because, so often the victim of trauma, they find a hard time loving anyone or loving themselves ever again.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Yeah. I would say the first victim of trauma is yourself.
Yeah.
The sense of self, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you go through these things, the first, I think what trauma really does is it takes the concept of conflict, right, and forces it onto yourself, right? And the idea of conflict is, I conflict with what is happening in front of me, right? And so the conflict, it should be at space. It should be what you're dealing with, or the person you're dealing with, or whatever, like the dog, right? You have a conflict with the dog. But what happens with trauma is the shame, the guilt, the regret, all of the judgment surrounding trauma forces you. And this is why I think trauma is so minimized in society today, is because of judgment. I think PTSD exists because of judgment, not because of trauma, right? And so when we deal with the conflict of trauma, if we think there's shame involved, guilt involved, regret involved, these big, nasty emotional words.
Oh yeah.
We refuse to take the conflict outside of ourselves and put it in the space in front of us. And then we do to ourselves, we have an internal conflict between ourselves, and then the sense of self becomes destroyed because we're contradicting ourselves and we can't make a decision.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's so true. Would you mind if I read this poem by Derek Walcott?
Go for it.
And I think it kind of summarized what we were just talking about. I did a presentation on forgiving yourself as a way towards healing from trauma, because, I'm sure you've heard, forgiving the offender of your trauma is sometimes a way towards it. And so often people forgot that we actually hold the shame and guilt ourselves, and we don't forgive ourselves. So this is called Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. And I just, when I first heard that read, I thought about, isn't that it about forgiving yourself? Like, to take back your identity from that person who stole it, then to take down the photographs and take down all those things and sit and feast, because you're worth it. You are worth forgiving yourself. That's anyway. It always makes me a little bit emotional when I read that poem, because, gosh, it just says so much to me. So yeah,
that last line, feast on your life, is really, to me, that's what spoke to me, and that's really profound to, because we like to look at only the thing that has broken us, rather than all of the things that make us who we are, especially trauma, right? Because trauma is so, it's this moment where, you know, like the old idea of you're driving down the road and you forget what just happened the last 20 miles because you zoned out. Well, trauma is that moment where you zone back in and you get hit by a truck.
Right.
And then that completely rearranges your consciousness and how you think about the world, because you have to, because you zoned out for those 20 miles and you may feel guilty because you zoned out. And maybe that's the reason why you got hit by the truck, even though the driver was drunk and you know, hit you from the side and you had the right of way. And like, nothing can disprove your guilt until you disprove your guilt. And it's remarkable to hear a poem like that and kind of hear that ending, to know, like, you and I know what that means, but getting there for most people is such a task. Yeah.
I think it helps in community. And that's the thing that you and I know is important from our time in the military, is that camaraderie, that bond, right? Here's the thing about, if we can take trauma and begin to talk about it more like it's normal than just a couple of 4 or 5 guys that came home from war. It's not just veterans who have PTSD, right? If we can begin to normalize this conversation, and we can start to change the conversation from what's wrong with that person to what happened to that person. And I'm a big advocate of helping anybody look through a trauma-informed lens. And if you could change that, you know, when you see somebody that you think, well, that person's whack, what's wrong with them? To, boy, that person's having a difficult time, I wonder what happened to them. Like, just a sentence, you just said it earlier, Dylan, about our words and how they have power. Imagine if our society begins to look at people now. Let's say your boss at work looks at you through a trauma-informed lens. You're having a bad day today. Instead of, what's wrong with you? What happened to you? Changes the whole thing for you, doesn't it? As an employee.
Yeah. And if you want to get real about it, it's not work where it matters. It's at home, right? Like, it's kids. Like, how many times in your child did you hear your parents say, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? Right. And I make the mistake. I will be the first to say I make the mistake with my son all the time. And I'm working on that every single day. I realize some of my weaknesses as a parent is that, because it's obviously becoming more conscious for me. But one of the hypocritical things humans do is that in the home, they will be a dictator, they will be a tyrant, they will be an authoritarian, but they'll go on social media and in public places and talk about politicians like they're Nazis and communists and all the dictators and authoritarians, but they're doing the exact same thing at home.
Right.
We're more worried about politics than we are with being a good parent and a functional human being that teaches kids how to not be tyrants, how to not be dictators of their own life. Like, we can have conversations with kids. It's hard. It's not easy, but that's like, man, like, you want to talk about toxic, like, it's not toxic workplaces, it's toxic homes.
It really is. It really is. And look at your kids, because they're a product of how you bring them up. You and I are both products of our past. You cannot shake that. And listen, mom and dad, if you're listening to me and Dylan right now, you are going to screw stuff up. Like, I raised 2 kids. I got almost 5 grandkids now. I got 4 and 1 will be back soon, right? Be coming soon. But my point is that you have a choice. And even in the midst of what Dylan was just saying, you're making these mistakes, you can change. And it's for what better cause than your own kid than to change, right? If it's not for them, then who's it for? And it comes back to love. It's selflessness. Like, if you can see it through that lens, then that changes it. But Dylan and I have screwed up a lot. I can just speak for him because I've been ahead of him. So Yeah, being a dad is not an easy, it's not an easy task.
I have a big profound question for you that I don't know the answer to. Right.
Okay.
I've been abused, right? I'm sure you've been abused in some way, whether it was by the military, which I'm sure you have, right? Or at home.
Yeah.
But like things have happened to you that have harmed you. And my question for you is, we came out to this point and we are these people that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But the abuse that I suffered is a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so like you look at abuse, and I'm certainly not advocating for abuse, right? No. I don't think anybody should ever have to go through that. No. But it taught me something incredibly valuable. It taught me how to manage pain and understand pain. How, like, what do you think about that? Like, are kids who don't go through abuse missing out on something? And what is it like? What do you think about that?
No, I can't advocate for abuse. I can say that there are better ways to get. There would have been a better way to get Shawn to where he is today than have to travel the path that put me here. Right. Like if I didn't have to experience those things early in my life, I could still have been the person I am. So I don't think they miss out on anything. In fact, well, they miss out on everything, which is great. Sure. If I think that there's better ways, Dylan. That's what I'm saying. Absolutely. To me, the way of love, and that's why that's the first chapter of my book. That's why I spend, of the 127 pages I wrote, 50 pages on love, because this is the missing ingredient in so many people's lives. And you can be the yes parent even. Yep. Like people always say, oh, don't be the yes parent. Well, why not? I advocate for this, Dylan. You ready for this? This will knock your socks off. I say it to all the dads that I talk to. Don't spend time worrying about your kid at the next stage of life. What young dads do is like, well, as soon as my son is this age, I'll be able to play catch. And as soon as my son is this age, I'll be able to talk with him. And as soon as my son or my daughter is this age, I'll be able. Mindfulness is like this thing that people have put a wonky feel on. Mindfulness just simply means being mindful of the moment, right? If you could just enjoy your kid at 18 months for being an 18-month-old, like just celebrate everything that is 18-month-old. And then when they're 2, celebrate their 2-ness. Quit trying to push them out, because guess what? 18 years goes by like that and they're gone. Yeah. And then you sit back and you're like me and you're like, I really could have spent more time with my son and my daughter. I really could have spent more time loving them instead of trying to teach them all the whatevers, but just like in the moment being mindful with them. That's, man, I think that that's a key to success about being any kind of parent, is to live in the moment with your kids, because they're gone before you know it. Trust, they really are. So I didn't answer your question, but it really took me to that point anyway.
It's not really a question about abuse, is it? It's a question of whether we actually believe things would have been different had things been different, right?
Yeah.
And that's, like
philosophical.
I think it's important to think about that.
Yeah.
In terms of how we think about consciousness and how we think about how we manage things and how we deal with things.
Sure.
Because I think very much so my life would have been different had abuse been different, or had my father been alive. Mm-hmm. Right? That would have been a very interesting thing. And I don't think I would have turned out who I am now.
No, you think you'd been different?
I really do, because my father, and so a little bit of context, my father was an alcoholic. He was very much addicted to tobacco. I'm not entirely kind of educated on what else, but I've heard cocaine and I've heard, other things, but those addictions being told to me at 7, 8 years old, when I was asking the questions, they made an impact on me
Mhm.
to the point where I'm 31 years old. I've never had alcohol. I've never had tobacco. I've never done drugs outside of the prescriptions that I had to take for my knee surgeries. And here's the thing. I've had 3 knee surgeries. I didn't take pain pills after 2 days of each of those surgeries because I was so fervently against
Mhm.
the possibility of becoming like my father, right?
Mhm.
And that only came because of the trauma of him committing suicide.
Yeah.
And so to me, that tells me something in terms of like philosophical question. Things would have been different had I stayed alive because I wouldn't have made the same choice.
Mhm.
There
Mhm.
wasn't enough incentive for me to say, I'm not going to do those things. And with my father had an addictive personality, guess what? I know
Mhm.
me. I have an addictive personality, right? There's certainly things that I've been addicted to, right? And in my early 20s, sex was one of them,
Mhm.
right? Because that was the thing that distracted me from all of the things that I hated about my life.
Mhm.
And so and not to mention video games and all the other things that young men do to get
Yeah.
away from the realities of life. So
Mhm.
it's an interesting question because abuse, I do not do it, right? I do not condone that, right? I will never hit my son. I will never hit any kids
Mhm.
that I have. I will never hit anyone unless they fucking hit me, right? Like
Right. There's a difference there.
if self-defense is warranted, right? I've been a concealed carry instructor for,
Mhm.
5 to 10 years. I don't even know, right? I've obviously been to war twice. I know how to conduct violence,
Mhm.
and I know I have a very, very high regard and respect for it. Um,
Yeah.
but abuse, violence, and I want to even get away from the idea of abuse, but violence itself has taught me something because I did, this is something my followers don't actually know a lot about me. I did jujitsu for about 7 years.
Mhm.
I was nearly a purple belt. I was about to get my purple belt and I tore my ACL the first time. I did Muay Thai for 4 or 5 years. I trained MMA, a couple of professional MMA fighters, and I was their corner man for a lot of their fights. Like, and now, like, I just got through sniper school. I've been through so many marksmanship courses now from the military that I can't even count. But I'm a shooter as well. So like, I'm infantry. I've been infantry for 14 years. I know violence.
Mhm.
Violence is a language. And if you are not versed in that language, you don't see, I think, a real picture of what the world is showing you. And so my question for people, the world, you, yourself, myself, right,
Mhm.
is like, what significance does violence teach us? Whether you've been the one
Mhm.
engaging in it or the victim of it, but
Yeah.
what do you think is the significance of violence as something that teaches us how to really understand the perspective of being a part of the real world and reality?
Yeah. Because I think it's an important point. You just said it in your last sentence that it's a reality. Violence is a reality in the world. Uh, look across
Yeah.
the expanse of our time as human beings. I think what violence, both the victim of, or even on the football field,
Yeah.
it's a violent sport. Um, I think what it's taught me is that I'm more resilient than I thought I was. I think that, um, and it's not to say that people can't not be resilient, because that, I know that's the case, but I can tell you that those things that occur to you and occur against you, if you can get yourself back up and try to drive on, then what violence teaches you and things like that is that you're actually worth getting back up. Like, you've made it through that. You fought that battle, and war taught me that, honestly. You know, violence also taught me that I take things for granted.
Yeah.
I learned that, right? I always use this example. It seems silly to some people, but I took for granted carpet. I didn't know I took for granted carpet until I spent 15 months not on carpet. And when I came home to put my toes without my boots on in my carpet in my living room, I realized something in that moment. Like, I have taken this for granted.
Yeah.
And war will teach you a lot of things. It will teach you that you are scared as well.
Yeah.
So it teaches your body to protect itself. Violence and war does that. So I'm not saying that violence doesn't teach you things, Dylan. I'm saying I wish we didn't have it. I'm saying that as a person who is an advocate against violence, I would say that there's a better way, but you'll never find that because the world is a violent place. So I'm just speaking out into the universe right there. You know,
Yeah.
I would rather the way was love, and we figure out a way how we can love each other into resilience. But until we get to that point in the world, learn these things, that you have probably done tougher things in your life. So get your ass back up and keep trucking. And two, you're not alone in it. Even though maybe sometimes you feel like you are, we've all had violence perpetrated against us at some point in our life. Reach out to the people closest to you. Even if they're not close to you, reach out to them. As you can tell, Dylan, I appreciate your want and your passion for like doing something that helps drop the numbers of suicides, that helps to let people in a little bit, and know that they're not by themselves. You know, I've just checked out your social media a little bit, and I know that you have a big heart. Like that's important to you, that you know that people know that you care about them. So I appreciate what you've been doing.
Yeah. I could say the same about you.
Thanks, bro.
I'm the kind of person that just, I feel like I just know people when I talk to them, right? You give me more than 5 minutes with you, and having listened to you for as long as we've been on this for about an hour, you can recognize when, you know, people really mean what they say. And that's clear with you as well.
Yeah.
You know, like, to me, I ask these really big questions, you know, to myself and to other people.
Yeah.
Very much because of, you know, at the age of 6 years old, I had to ask the biggest question of all. Why? Right? Like, why do I have to deal with this? Why do I not have a dad? Right? Like, and I had to question at that age. And so, you know, what I've learned and what I've seen in the world is very different from other people. And I ask bigger questions oftentimes, you know, and I used to think I overthink, but at this time, at this point, I'm like, this is me. This is normal, right?
This is who I am.
Yeah. And so, you know, I look at all of these, and I want to dig deeper into things that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't like violence, right? I may have been trained to conduct violence for the past 14 or so years, but I don't want to, like, but I know I might have to. I know there's a potential that there are people that disagree with what I do, or disagree with what I say, or disagree with who I am, or want what I have. You know, like, there's so many ways or reasons why we conduct violence, but it's something that's fundamentally real.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't deny that, because for much of my life, I was denying the reality that I had emotions, and that didn't go well for me. So I no longer deny the reality of things that are very much real.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of my work and a lot of what I do and try and ask, you know, to better myself and build my consciousness is trying to ask real questions like that.
Yeah.
You know, and dig into, you know, how you think about things and how I think about things. And I love having conversations with people like yourself, because you're willing to answer questions that you're like, man, that's hard. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But they're important. They're
They
important. Like, people don't want to have conversations that really dig into something. Like, And I get it. You just reminded me of something. The Army, they spend millions of dollars teaching us to create violence. They do. And they're really good at it.
They are.
Uh, from a tactician point, from a mental preparedness, physiological, they teach you, train you how to emit violence. They spend very little money fixing you after they're done with you.
Yeah.
I wrote this is a small LinkedIn article. I call it 6 Days Combat to Carpet. So the last combat mission I was on in Ramadi, people trying to kill me. 6 days later, I'm standing in my living room, right? Like,
that's crazy.
How do you decompress from that? How do you even understand where you stand in the world anymore?
Yeah.
It's not like that they poured a bunch into me trying to deconstruct the machine they had made. So it's just left to us. It's left for the traumatized or the person who's walked through that to then just try to figure your life out.
Yeah.
And that's the issue, I think, that I see a lot. And that's why I'm trying to make a difference. I know that's why you're trying to make a difference. And we have to team up to do it.
And you know what? You were 2007 you came home?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
2019. Right. And I'm going to tell you a little story here. 2019, I came home from Afghanistan, my second deployment. We spent approximately 10 to 14 days in Fort Bliss for demo. And then we came home. Right. And a lot of things happened on that deployment. That's not what I'm going to talk about. But, I wear this on my wrist for a reason. And I haven't talked a ton about this, but there's 5 names on this. There's 4 on this side, and then there's 1 underneath. We lost 5 soldiers in the first year and 3 or 4 months after we came home. 4 to suicide, 1 to a firearms accident that involved alcohol. So there's questions, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The question of why, obviously, is paramount. But those 14 days, those 10 to 14 days we spent in Fort Bliss, we got nothing from it. Right. And not to mention, right, like when we look deeper into it, there's a lot of leadership issues. And I have always been an advocate for looking deeper into how we lead as a military, right? Like, and how we lead starts from the very top of the military leadership structure. And then also it starts at the bottom going up. And we're failing, right? Like, sure, we may be the most effective and most fearsome fighting force on the planet, but at what cost? At what expense are we willing to go to be that? And it raises a lot of questions. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be an interesting battle to see what happens with, obviously there's threats to our security, but there's also threats to who we are as a people. For veterans, especially, like, where's the support? And maybe it'll fall on deaf ears, maybe it won't, but 2007 to 2019, not much has changed.
Right. So you got an extra 8 days.
Yeah.
The demo.
Yeah. I mean, it begs a lot of questions, right? Because I can tell you what, you could have taken those 8 days out and we still nothing would have been different.
It's just making sure you had all the things signed.
Yeah.
Could have done that in a day and spent some time really, I always think back about, World War II veterans, how they had months on the ships trying to get home together, sharing their stories, talking about things, laughing together, crying together, yelling together. And they had all this time to decompress, I would ask my grandpa what happened, when you were over there, and the only thing he'd ever say is, Shawn, the girls in Paris were sure pretty. That was the only thing my grandpa ever told me about World War II. Right. And the thing is that he was able to, with his buddies, really shake off some war dust, if you will. I can use that term. I didn't really have that. 6 days isn't enough to shake anything off. I still got sand in my trousers after 6 days, man.
Yeah.
And we've got to do better. But I think it's coming from you and I think it's coming from our own. I don't think we can depend upon the VA to do it for us. The Army isn't going to do it. The Marine Corps, they're not doing it.
Right.
And so it's my new battle standard, if you will. It's the flag I'm carrying. Is this? I got to do something because somebody's got to do something, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm doing, and I feel like that's what you do. Yeah. I think it's going to come within the grassroots of us after. So
it'll be interesting to see what comes from it.
It will.
Yeah, it will. It's definitely. When did you retire?
2012.
2012. Mm-hmm. It's a very different force.
Yeah, even just in the last, huh?
Yeah.
It was starting to change when I was leaving, so I could feel that.
I hesitate to say whether it's good or bad. There's sure. I think there's definitely a larger, obviously within, I only see Wisconsin, but there's a very large push for mental health, obviously because of these, but there's more, right? Like I went to sniper school this year. And I told, I did the psych exam and everything. And here's, I think, a credit to how the military has begun to look at mental health. I did the psych exam with a mental health professional that was not military, civilian. But she worked for the Guard, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I told her everything, right? Because I had literally just written a book. My book had come out in July, and literally 10 days later, I was in her office, and she's like, "How's your book?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm telling you everything." And so I told her about my father's suicide. I told her about my suicide. I told her about my mental health and what it had been and where I was now. In 15, 20 years ago, that was unheard of. Right. If you had said stuff like that, the stigma was, nope, you're not going to sniper school. And two, we're really going to probably question whether you should stay in or not.
Yeah. You're non-deployable. You'll be a non-deployable asset. Can't do your job.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so that stigma has obviously retained itself all the way up until now, because I still felt it. I was like, do I tell them,
Right. Yeah.
And so that's information that the Army will always have access to for the rest of my career. Right.
Yeah.
I still went to sniper school. Right. No problems. It didn't even bring up a red flag or anything. It was just like, cool. You have all the support factors that would deem that you're good, mm-hmm. that you've worked through your mental health issues.
How do you feel about that?
It's an example. I think it's a good example, right? Because the problem is that, I shouldn't say a problem. That's not a problem. It's a challenge, is that I have gone through the work, right? What happens to someone that's going through difficult times right then? Mm-hmm. They're a functional soldier, but they're struggling outside, mm-hmm. right? Because that's a reality, is there's people that are really, really, really good at their jobs, but they're really struggling as a human being because of their environment or because of, their
past,
their structure. It's a reality. And what happens to that person? Hey, we're not going to send you to sniper school, and hey, then we're going to get you some mental health help, but we're not going to send you AT. We're not going to send you to drill, or you're going to drill somewhere else. That's stigmatizing.
Right.
How do you deal with it?
Yeah.
Right. And then the reality is you need commanders that are also willing to say, I don't want them to leave. I want them to stay, because God forbid a leadership be an obligation to the people that you're supposed to lead. Right. I've seen it throughout my career. Oh, this guy failed his PT test. Do you want to put him in headquarters, because he's, he's probably going to fail the next one. So we're probably going to kick him out. Do you want him out of your squad so we can backfill his slot? No, I want to take him and help him get to where he can go. If he doesn't have the support, guess what? He's not going to pass. Right.
No.
But if I
maybe
can,
he's a great soldier. She's a great soldier, you know?
right. And,
yeah.
you know, it's a big question. Right. And I think leadership in general I think it's misunderstood in the Guard, but in the Army in general, I think it's really misunderstood. I think people think that leadership in the Army is about picking the best soldiers and getting the mission done with them. And it's not as much about, as a leader, whoever you get, you have to mold, you have to support, you have to listen to and develop, right? It's frustrating.
Well, you wonder, I just was looking, I'm in my office and I have my basic training, which 1990, that's a long time ago. I've got my little yearbook and it's from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It says, mission first, people always, right?
Sure.
And I think about that a lot. I don't think it's really about people at all. I think it should just be mission only.
That's
and there's no offense. I loved my time in the Army National Guard. It formed me and shaped me into the person that I am. It helped me with my discipline, to help me understand life.
Right.
So I don't want to dog it. I just know though, the mission is the mission.
Yep.
They have a 15% attrition rate in combat for a reason.
Yeah.
They'll keep going on missions even if you're losing people left and right.
Yep.
Because it's mission. It's not people always. But yeah.
Well, and to go with that, like in combat, right? And I've talked to soldiers about this a lot. In combat, it makes sense to be hard.
You have to,
because you can die, right? Like there's a pretty big incentive there to do what you need to do and get over it, right? So the get over it stuff kind of like, I'm sorry, but we don't have time to deal with your trauma right now. Like we might die here, right? We're on the X, but like, we're not there. Like train as you fight, I think was the worst thing that leaders could have latched onto, because they took that literally in all forms. And so rather than just training on the range or training in, on the training area and, doing what you need to do, they took it in terms of how they deal with soldiers and how they functionally lead soldiers anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you didn't do what they said, you're a shitbag.
And how's that help the National Guardsman or woman when they do it for a couple of days and 2 weeks in the summer, but you have to maintain this thing? How does that work exactly? It's one thing if I'm active duty and it's train as you fight. Yeah. That's what I do. That's my job. I do it every day. But then they expect the National Guardsman to do that too.
Yeah.
That I'm telling you, if you've never done it,
yeah.
it's a mind eraser it's code switching at its best.
It's disconnecting. Right. And I've focused for a long time on suicide, and I always ask the question, where does suicide come from? And when I talk to people and when I talk to groups, like I get all the answers, right? But fundamentally, if you look at a lot of reasons why people ultimately commit suicide, it leads to disconnection, right? It comes down to when you are disconnected from other people, community, right? You said it earlier, right? When you are disconnected from other people, you're going to make some choices that are fundamentally wrong in terms of living.
That's right.
It makes sense. And I don't blame people, quite frankly. Like a lot of the people that that I have seen, that I know that have committed suicide, like I couldn't blame them in that position, right? I can't even blame my father for making that choice, because he was in a shitstorm, and it makes sense to me. Yeah. Does it make sense to everybody? No. And I don't care. I don't care what they think, because they probably don't understand half of what my father was going through.
Yeah.
And I don't even understand half of what my father's going through, but it's disconnection. And when you create policies, when you create leadership styles that disconnect soldiers, when you judge soldier for failing one time, right? You're a PT failure one time, good luck. Your career's over.
Yeah.
Because it's disconnecting, because
It is.
everybody in that unit says you're a shitbag. Oh,
Yeah.
you got to go do remedial PT. Like,
yeah, you become what I call the virus in the midst of a healthy organism.
Yeah.
And we do that. We do that in our jobs. We do that in the military. We do that in our families.
yes.
Oh, try it, mom and dad. Try not making that one moment when your kid has done something bad to really point it out and make him feel like a shit bird. Guess what they're going to feel like for the longest time?
Yep.
It takes one time, really. It really does.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah. You feel like the virus in your family. And that's sad. That's sad, but that's what we do. So yeah, I don't know, man.
No, it's good to have a conversation to see, it's understood, right?
Yeah, man.
It's
it is good. It's good to meet you. So
likewise.
I just want to tell you that, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you for the steps that you're taking, because they're not easy steps. You've come out of your own trauma and you've decided that I need to do something for the other people around me. And that takes a lot of fortitude. It also takes a lot to be the character while you're serving in the Guard as this, hoo-ah sniper dude, but to also have this space in your life where you're talking about things that mean something beyond the violence, right? And I'm proud of you for doing it, because not all soldiers are going to be willing to do that, because it can stigmatize you as being that, oh, you're just that soft-handed sergeant, that's just what you do. And
yeah,
just because you care. And so I was thinking about it as you've been talking, how I would be honored to serve with you had I served, because you do see people, soldiers, as people. And I know that you care about them. So it actually makes me feel good being a retired person to look and say, I know that there's still people there that care about the troops, and it's just really important. So thanks, Dylan, for doing that, man.
Yeah. I feel seen. That doesn't happen very often to like for people to recognize that part of, because I, like, on social media, I don't talk about military that much. I talk about veterans, I talk about what it's like, but I don't, I haven't talked about sniper school, which I just went through this last month. I don't talk about that stuff because, one, military, it's just not, it's not something that I'm comfortable exposing. I'm not like other military content creators. Most of my followers, honestly, I would be surprised if they knew that I was actually serving, like when I post uniform content, it's like, whoa, I didn't know that, so yeah, it's rare that I get that kind of, I guess, recognition. I don't search for it. Obviously, it's not something I don't want recognition. The funny thing is, like, I do all this, I don't want recognition. I'm an introvert. I would much rather other people share this message for me than having to do all this work by myself, because it's, I'm sure it's hard.
Yeah. I don't have a publicist. I am a publicist. Yeah.
I'm my publicist. I'm my content creator. I'm
all that
videographer,
too.
My photographer.
I'm very impressed with all your content, though. Like, I love how you got your Instagram set up. I'm like, I think you guys got it going on. Nice work, man. Nice work.
Thank you. I'm gonna be getting your book. Well, I think Ashley's sending me your book. So once I get that, I'll be reading it, and I'll be letting you know what I think of it. I'm excited.
Man.
To read it.
Well, as soon as I read your book, I'm going to put it out on my Insta.
Likewise.
I'll make sure that other people read it, check it out. You get it on Amazon. Is that where people can purchase yours? Mine too.
Yeah.
Definitely. I want to be a champion of your stuff, and you can be a champion if you want of mine. And
I will be.
Let's take over the world for good.
Yeah.
I'd rather not be colonizers, but I would rather spend my time now like just bringing love to people who desperately need it.
Yeah.
And I see my veteran brothers and sisters in such need of somebody who gives a damn, right? That's it. Like, and if you're listening today, if you're like, well, what can I do? Give a damn.
Yeah.
That's what you can do. Start today by giving a damn, and you can make a change in somebody's life. It takes about that much too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. So I'm gonna maybe you'll stick with that, but I'm gonna ask you the final question.
Okay.
And we'll knock this out. If there was a message you could leave the world, what would it be?
Yeah. I wrote this in the forward of my book. When my kids, grandkids, and great grandkids are all sitting around the Thanksgiving Christmas table, and grandpa is long gone, and they're telling stories, because that's what you do at those meals. And they're telling stories about Grandpa Shawn. I don't want that story to be what a brave soldier he was, what a strong guy he was, but what a great lover I was. That my grandpa, my dad, my great grandpa would have a legacy of love. Like that's what I want. Because, you know, if I look back over my past, that's not all completely what I would sit around the kitchen table and say, right? So I want to break generational trauma. And by being that first, like you hear first gen in college, I want to be first gen in love. Like when my kids and grandkids speak of me. And so if you begin, like if I had a message for the world, is if you could lay the foundation of the legacy of love, then that begins to change other things. We talk about systemic racism. What if we started with a legacy of love? It could change that. The violence that goes on in the world, love could change that too. I know it sounds like I love a cheeseburger. How can love change things? But if you do it like I described it, being selfless and vulnerable, then really you could make a change in your sphere of influence. And then I can make a change in my sphere, and Dylan, you can make a change in your sphere. Pretty soon those spheres connect and we change the world. But it just takes you today making a change in your life, in the people that you love that are close to you. So that's what I'd leave the message with, Dylan.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's so important, especially now more than ever.
Yeah, me too. Hey, man.
Shawn, thank you. Thanks for being on. I'm sure we're gonna be keeping in touch. I'm looking forward to your book.
We will, man. Definitely keep in touch with me. Let me know how things are going.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, for all of you listening, please go check out Shawn. I'll put a link to his book in his description. If you've got a link, I'll put your link to your website as well.
Yeah, check out my website. It'd be cool. Yeah.
And go check him out. He's been a great individual. This is our first conversation, and this has been incredible. But if you've made it this far, thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time on the Dylan Experience. Too easy.